Hey gang, and welcome back. Before we begin, I feel the need to thank you all again for another week of overwhelming support. As of recording this, my third gameplay is over 1,000 views and we've passed 344 subscribers, so be sure to tune in May 30th to see if you've won my first giveaway. For this week's episode, we'll be looking at another highly requested general. This is Odric, Lunarch Marshal. Costing 3 colorless and 1 white mana, Odric is a respectable 3 power, 3 toughness human soldier with a text box stretching ability. Triggering at the beginning of each, and not just our own combat steps, creatures we control gain nearly any static ability found in Magic the Gathering, so as long as one of our creatures has that ability. What this means is if we have one creature with flying and another with lifelink, at the start of each combat step, all of our creatures will have both flying and lifelink. If you're like me, I'm sure your mind is already blitzing through cards that would be great in the deck, but I'd like to start off by saying that this is most likely going to be a shorter than normal video. The fact of the matter is, outside of playing an Attilia Samite Master Priest tribal deck once at the beginning of my journey into EDH, I've never had much of an opportunity, let alone desire to play mono white as an EDH deck. That being said, I'm not sure how a typical mono white EDH deck plays out, so this video will mostly consist of suggestions. Typically, and this could just be for me, I found that mono white is probably one of the weakest EDH colors when it comes to being on its own. Don't get me wrong, white is probably one of the best support colors and cover a multitude of roles when you mix it in with any other colors, but it lacks a lot of what makes other colors stand out. If I had to break it down into rankings based on color, I'd wager it'd look a little bit like this. Blue and black would be at the top due to their ability to control, remove, and draw reliably. Green would be a close third, with strong ramp, decent albeit sometimes limited draw, and some great ways to deal with permanents. Red and white would be 4th and 5th depending on the general, as they still have ramp, but sometimes lack the card draw and other type of spells that make the other 3 stand out. So ideally, if we want to make any white deck, we want to be certain that we start with a base that will at least address some of these issues. First, let's look at some cards that can help us ramp. Burnished Heart has become one of the staple EDH cards for any deck that doesn't run green. It might not fare terribly well in a competitive environment, but if you know your meta's a bit slower, this little guy is a great way to get us 2 basics to the field. Similarly, a Rescos Explorer can find us an amount of lands based on how many opponents we're facing. Sure, they don't go to the field like they would with Heart, but we're also not only limited to finding basics, so that's kinda nice. Land Tax is a white staple if you've got the budget for it. It'll help us clean out our library from basics, and chances are we'll never be in a position to miss the trigger anyway. Mana Rocks are also a great addition. I'd rank Mind Stone, Hedron Archive, and Commander Sphere a bit higher than the rest, with the noticeable exceptions being like Soul Ring, since they provide us with a bit of ramp, and then they can be sacrificed later on in the game for draw. Speaking of draw, white doesn't really have a lot of ways to do this that don't require a decent investment, or that we meet a certain criteria. Mentor the Meek is a great example of this. If you want to run a small curve, or maybe even a token theme, he can be a great draw engine. He is, however, dependent on you having a stream of creatures. If you're considering running him, I would also advocate for MacLeod, because he'll give us a steady stream of tokens to trigger his ability. Similarly, Mind's Eye gives us the same 1 mana for 1 card as Mentor does, but has a similar requirement as well. Having to wait until an opponent draws can sometimes be too late. Considering the initial investment of 5 mana, you might not have enough mana left over afterwards to be able to use it on those triggers that are going to occur on our opponent's turns. Skeleton Key is a new card and probably one of the most interesting inclusions for an Odric deck. Providing our entire army, assuming Odric is out, with Skulk isn't something to ignore, and card filtering is almost always welcome as long as we have at least a few cards in hand. Lastly, we can always trust in Skullclamp to save the day, and doubly so if you end up running a token theme. There's a reason this is banned in most other constructed formats, we might as well abuse it when we can. So we've covered some good cards that'll help us ramp or draw, but what we haven't really touched on is stuff that'll work well with Odric, aside from Skeleton Key. So let's look at a few additions with his ability in mind. We want to maximize on the amount of abilities we can grant our creatures, and to that end we'll most likely want to run creatures that have multiple such abilities, or multiple creatures to serve as redundancy with abilities. One great example of a card we can include is Angelic Overseer. As long as we controlled a human, i.e. Odric, she'll have hexproof and indestructible. Both of these will be granted to our creatures in combat, and she even comes in with her own built-in protection. Baneslayer Angel is one of those cards where it's great in modern, but kinda lackluster in most EDH games. She's a powerful creature, but usually we want a bit more from our stuff. Thankfully, Odric isn't as demanding as a commander, so granting our creatures flying, lifelink, and first strike is usually enough to be a consideration. Actually, now that I think about it, there are a surprisingly good amount of angels who can provide us with benefits, but be careful. Angels tend to be one of the more costly side of mana, so run only the ones that you'll know you'll be happy to draw. You'll also probably want to consider some tribal editions like Captain of the Watch. She'll help us with tokens, provide most of our units a pump, and give us both vigilance in and out of combat, not that it really matters outside of combat. If I had to compare the new Odric to a pre-existing white commander, I'd say that he's probably very similar to Kemba, Ka Regent, in the sense that he will probably highly value equipment. Everyone's favorite Voltron enabling artifacts are probably the easiest way to grant our troops whatever ability we're looking for. Do we need Trample? Why not run Sword of Vengeance or Loxodon Warhammer? Are we looking for lifelink? Warhammer will do double duty, and Basilisk Collar could be great redundancy. White also benefits in the ease that it has for searching for and recurring artifacts. Open the Armory is a new addition I'm sure many white decks will run, and tutoring to our hand for only 2 mana is pretty much on point with Demonic Tutor. Similarly, you can run the increasingly expensive Enlightened Tutored or Steel Saber's Gift to round out our tutor package. If I had to pick one, I'm pretty sure you'll agree that Enlightened's the way to go, since instant speed and flexibility of being able to find an enchantment is huge. Nahiri the Lithomancer could also make a guest appearance, as she gives us nearly all of what we want in one card. Whether it's providing us with a token that can equip for free, cheating or recurring an artifact, or making a killer sword, Nahiri is pretty much a sound investment for only 5 mana. White has quite a few ways to protect itself, from granting protection to exiling troublesome permanents. Chances are you know your meta better than I do, but I would suggest considering some of the following. Brave the Elements is a great and cheap to cast way to protect your entire field. Swords to Plowshares will deal with any problematic creature at the cost of giving our opponents some life. Since we're mostly an aggro deck, this isn't such a big deal for us. Another new addition from a commander set, Grasp of Fate, is probably one of the best variants of Oblivion Ring that's seen print in recent years. It can't be abused like some of the other exile/return spells, but being able to hit 1 permanent per opponent is pretty great for only 3 mana. Well gang, those are my thoughts on Odric Lunarch Marshal. He's an interesting addition to an already heavily saturated aggro color, but granting our entire team a bunch of abilities is significantly more interesting than creating just tokens. His cost is also pretty unrestrictive, so I can see him hitting the field pretty easily by turn 3. Strangely enough, this video turned out a lot longer than I thought it would be, so I guess I had a lot to say about Odric. Anyway guys, thank you for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and tune in at the end of the month for my giveaway. Thanks for watching!